This video is about how to figure out your assignment, which is your scope of work. And this is going to vary in complexity from something as basic as walking a site with a client, just looking at their trees, to doing comprehensive proposal for a construction project, to litigation work. The litigation work I don't have experience with, so I'm not going to touch that. But you can see that it goes really simple to really complex, with a lot of steps on the complex end. So this video, I'm going to have 3 parts. 1, what is an assignment? How would you define that? 2, how do you go about figuring it out? And 3, some examples. What is an assignment? An assignment is just it's a synonym for scope of work. What are you supposed to do as part of this project? What is the client paying you for, and what are they expecting? Assignment is the term that is used more in the consulting arborist circles, I think. Otherwise, I hear scope of work a lot more. The importance of establishing a very specific assignment is that the client will know exactly what you're gonna do and they won't be disappointed. What that could include is exactly what you're gonna do. For this development report, I'm going to visit the site. I'm gonna measure these trees. I'm gonna do this. I'll send you these deliverables, blah, blah, blah. It could also include things that you're not gonna do if you're gonna be really specific. So again, with development projects, sometimes I'll say, I'm only looking at the trees on your property, or I'm only looking at this particular area. I'm not doing all of it. So it helps to be really specific. Otherwise, you might get stuck in this situation where there's a miscommunication, and because it was too vague, you actually have to do more work than you were expecting, and or the client is going to be disappointed with what you've turned up. On the simpler end, it could be just you're just going to go look at a tree, but what is the client concerned about specifically? What trees are you going to look at? Is this just a verbal consultation, or do they want a report from you? The second part is, how do you figure out the assignment? It's going to come down to listening, asking a ton of questions, then doing your own research. The listening part is really important because in some ways people fill in the space. Like there are people who are not super comfortable with silence. If you make space for the other person, they're gonna keep talking and they might give you some information that you actually need, but that they otherwise might not have given you. An example would be specifically for certain clients that are withholding information for some reason, and they're being kind of vague or generic in what they're asking you. It could be that they have an ulterior motive and they don't want to tell you right off the bat, whether that's conscious or subconscious. I had a client who reached out and they wanted to be able to date the age of their fruit trees. I thought, well, maybe you could use a resistor graph. Maybe you could do some increment coring. You could figure, then you can count the rings. But to me, it was a little odd because he said he was the one who planted them and he knew when he planted them. It became clear based on the way that he was saying things that he was trying to take his neighbor's property, and he had planted these trees on that property a certain amount of time ago, and he thought that that was enough time for him to claim that property as his own. This listening will allow you to determine if you're competent enough to do that job, if it's something you want to do, if they're a red flag client, and so on. The next thing you want to do is ask a lot of questions. As the client's talking, if there's anything that you're concerned about or curious about, it doesn't hurt to get more information. I want to say like 50 to 70% of the time that I'm talking to a client on the phone, I've asked the question and I'm listening to their answers. And then a small fraction of that, maybe 5 to 10%, is me clarifying, this is what it sounds like you need. Can you confirm that? I would say that you can ask any number of questions, provided they're not questions of incompetence. And what I mean by that is questions that another consulting arborist, if they were also talking to this client, that they would not need to ask those same questions. An example might be, what's a protected or regulated tree in that particular jurisdiction? What do they require as part of the arborist reports? There are exceptions though, even in situations like this, because maybe a client has something like a code compliance issue or a stop work order, or if they're doing a development project, the county will return a list of incompleteness comments to say that these are things that you need to do. So you need to know precisely what they need in those specific situations, so you're not going over and underboard as far as what they need. As part of this process, you might also be asking for documents like plans if it's development related. If you are not someone who is good at listening and asking questions, that's not something that I can help you with. That is absolutely a soft skill that you need to have as a consultant. And also just that little bit of problem solving to tease out what that client actually needs. The next step after this, before you send them a proposal, would be to research. If you are dealing with something like a arborist report for a tree removal permit, which is very straightforward and simple, you still need to know what that jurisdiction covers. So what area they cover. Is your client's property within that jurisdiction, or is it within another one, even if the city name is the same? So for example, in my area, there's a city called Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek has areas of it that are not governed by the city of Walnut Creek, but rather the county that Walnut Creek is in, which is Contra Costa County. If you wrote the client an arborist report that was based on the city requirements and they're actually in the county, you haven't done your job properly. It's possible that they might not actually need a report to take a tree down if they're in this jurisdiction versus that one. This gets much more complicated when it comes to development. I made a separate video on looking up municipal codes and report requirements for development projects. But in that case, you have to not only know what jurisdiction governs the site, but what is that city or county wanting as part of the arborist report. It could be simply looking at the trees. It could be including height, appraised value, how far how far something is from the tree that they're planning on putting in. The cities will really break down what they want, and it's up to you to find that information if another arborist will also be able to find it. That could go as far as contacting the staff at that municipality to clarify some of the requirements. Once you've finished this phase and you've put together something in writing, you can submit that to the client and have a final refinement phase. So this last section, I think, is going to be a little bit more fun. It's going to be examples of how I refined an assignment from the initial communication to the final assignment. I don't have all the details because some of these are jobs I did at the previous company, but I'll just get started. So this is very recent. I had a client who wanted an assessment of a redwood in his backyard that had codominant stems. He said, I had a free initial site visit by 2 arborists. One suggested a certified report and a TPP. The other said to cut down the tree. I want another opinion. So I emailed verbatim, can you share a photo of the tree? I'm also curious what the other arborist meant by a TPP. Is that a tree protection or a tree preservation plan? Those are typically only required or useful for development. So if you're planning on building for a property, please share any plans or at least the address and an idea of what you are planning to do. I can give my impression of the tree and the project and a proposal. And the client responded saying, the TPP was my extrapolation of the vague recommendation from one of the arborists. We don't plan on building. We just want to have something legally binding to show insurance that we did all we could do to protect the property in case the tree fails. So the final assignment that I worked out with this person was I would visit their property, I would assess the tree, and I would provide a report with the current conditions of the tree, plus any recommendations for care. And I also communicated these recommendations to the tree service, and I reviewed their bid, and I may review their work. The second category of requests is tree risk assessment. I get a lot of tree risk assessment, or I get an okay amount of tree risk assessment requests. but I will say I have done very few, maybe like 5. And the reason for it is because oftentimes people don't need it. I think what people are looking for is to know if a tree is hazardous to them or not. That's all it is. They don't need you to run through the form that's in track. You don't need to run through the matrices and tell them what to do. Like, that's not exactly what they're looking for. It ends up being a lot of jargony fluff. I don't want to call it fluff, but like a lot of stuff they actually do not need. So in those times when I talk to someone about it, I'll ask, what do you need this for? Is this a county or a city that has asked you to do this? Usually end up looking at their tree, letting them know what I'm seeing, what could be a concern, how they can mitigate it, and that's all they want. I had another client email me this. I have 3 massive redwood trees a foot from the fence line, and my neighbors plan to build an ADU 5 feet from the trees. And she goes on to give a lot of details. The city arborist and 3 others stated the high risk and the recommendation that they move it to the other side of the yard and use this particular type of foundation. But I want one more report with the health and the size of the trees, risk to their health that the ADU would cause, blah, blah, blah. We want to recommend they move it to the other side of the yard and still use preventative techniques, blah, blah, blah. It was very long and detailed, and clearly this client knows exactly what they wanted. But the situation here is a little different. I actually turned this down. I said, thank you for reaching out. This isn't something I can help you with. While what you have written makes sense, even though I haven't seen the trees yet, I don't allow clients to specify what goes into the report in the detail that you've provided. If there are 3 non-city arborists involved, I suggest reaching out to one of them for another written report. In my experience, it gets messy when there's that many opinions. And also, not only did she say, I want you to specify this kind of foundation, I want you to tell them to move it to the other side of the yard, and then still do all the same things. That may or may not be something that I would have suggested. I may also have suggested they leave it in the current location and do other measures, but this person has a very specific outcome that they want, and they want someone who delivers on that. So what is it about these other 3 arborists that didn't work out? Why is she shopping around for so many opinions? I just didn't want to be involved in that at all. I had another prospective client who was in the middle of remodeling their home when the city stopped them and said that they needed a tree report. This is a little bit of negligence on the city side, because this is stuff that should have been caught before all the permits were granted, but now they're saying you have to stop work, you have to look at your neighbor's trees. Because she had a stop work order, I asked for that. I asked for plans. I wanted to get an idea of what this entailed, especially because the client said multiple times, please let me know if you're available today. After a few back and forths, I said to her, I took a look at the plans and the stop work order is not very clear. There's references to a single protected tree, but also the overall, like the usual protected tree requirements, which then expands it well beyond that single tree. So do you have contact information for the inspector who gave you the stop work order? And did you already go through planning for this project? Can I talk to your inspector? I need to make sure that if I was gonna do a rush job, like this lady wants someone today, if I was gonna do a rush job, that I get as much information as possible. Otherwise, it's gonna continue to delay her project. I ended up sending her a couple of different costs. One for just the one tree, a second cost for the usual scope that I would do in this particular city. I put in a lot of protections for myself and a lot of caveats, and ultimately avoided this client because I knew of another arborist who was going to be right in that city the very next day. The other 2 are also development related, so I'm sorry, I have a bias towards that because that's what 80% of my work is. So there was another client who reached out to me. They were starting to do some landscaping work, like construction, like actual construction, not just planting plants. They got stopped and now they need an arborist report. The arborist that they start working with was getting really flaky. She would promise to get it done by a certain amount of time, and then she didn't get it to them, and she was constantly late. Then she had told them certain things on the site, and then just before she finished the report, she told them that she was changing her mind, and that's what the report reflected. So it was a lot of unprofessionalism along the way, and these clients just wanted a second report at that point. I told them that I could technically do a full-on report again. I could do a peer review, and I could just read the report from my office, work off of that arborist's observations, like the diameters, things like that, and let you know if I think that this report is good or not. What the client wanted ultimately was for me to visit the site and walk through with them, talk through the recommendations, and I did do that. And the last example I have, again, is construction related, was someone emailed me about a construction project that they were trying to get permitted. And they were in a situation where they had an addition that was undergoing construction already, but as part of a separate permit, they wanted to do like a pool or something. Let me back up. So the county wanted them to give the name of arborist who had put together this tree protection plan. The reality is it was the landscape architects that put together the plan, but the city just wanted it verified by an arborist. What I ultimately suggested was, it sounds like you want to use your name. I'm okay with that if I agree with what's written in the tree protection plan. I would like to field verify the trees, their species, their sizes, conditions, and then I want to review the plan and see if the tree protection that's being suggested is good enough. If it's not good enough, I will make recommendations for how to make it better, make it good enough so that I'm willing to put my name on it, and then I'll put my name on it. But this normally doesn't fulfill what that county requires. Normally there's a full-on arborist report, but if they're not asking for it, let's not open up a can of worms and create more roadblocks on purpose for this client. So those are my examples. Unfortunately, I didn't have too much of a diversity. They were all really linked to construction, but hopefully that gave you an idea of what the client could come in asking for and how that could change as I'm talking to them about it and what I'm hearing that they actually want from me. Sometimes clients will completely ignore what you've suggested. Like I had a client, also development, where I did some work for them 6-10 years ago. So the data is completely outdated now. Trees have grown larger, been removed, declined, and so this thing basically needed to be redone. And the client did not want that. So I gave them two options. One, to do it properly, which is what I'm suggesting, and two, to do it your way, which is to use old data, which is likely going to get rejected. Those are things that you can do. Some people will refuse to do the second option of doing what the client wants because revisions are really annoying. It's not fun to do them. But my perspective is if the client insists that this is what they want, I've told them, I've covered myself, and they still want to spend that money and risk wasting their money and their time, I'm okay with that. I'll just do it. This whole thing takes a lot of experience and intuition, and you just learn to get a feel for it over time. You're gonna make mistakes. You just have to make sure that each mistake you make, you learn from it for the next time, so you're not constantly making that mistake. I have definitely made mistakes in the past where I've done more work than the client needed, and other times where I did a little bit less. And in both cases, someone loses, right? The client might have paid a little bit more than they really needed to. And in the second case, if I didn't do enough, then I would have to go back out on the site and eat the cost of doing all that extra work.